Her true story from Arizona. My daughter screamed, "You've ruined my life." I packed my bags and left. The heat in Arizona doesn't just sit on your skin, it settles in your bones, a dry, persistent weight that reminds you of your own mortality. For 27 years, I had learned to live with it, to find peace in the slivers of shade cast by the Palo Verde tree my late husband, David, and I had planted when our daughter, Jessica, was just a girl. Now, that tree's shade was the only part of this house that still felt like mine. The rest belonged to her, or so she believed. It was a Saturday in late June, the kind where the sun beats down with such a blinding white light that the world seems to lose its color. The thermometer on our back patio read 112 degrees, but I had stopped paying attention to such warnings years ago. I was on my knees in the garden, my hands protected by thick leather gloves that David had given me for our 30th anniversary back, when he still believed we'd have 30 more years together. I was carefully tending to the desert marigolds, those hardy little survivors that somehow managed to bloom despite the punishing heat. The soil was dry and unforgiving, cracked like an old woman's hands, but I had learned its secrets over the decades. A little bit of patience, a little bit of water, a little bit of love. The same things it took to raise a child, though I was beginning to wonder if I had miscalculated somewhere along the way. Inside, the house was a cool, sterile box of white walls and gray furniture, curated by Jessica to look like a page from one of those expensive home design magazines she was always buying. My things, the worn armchair David used to sit in while reading his geology journals, my collection of porcelain birds that I'd been gathering since I was 16, the hand-stitched quilt from my mother that had taken her 3 years to complete had all been relegated to my small bedroom, a quiet museum of a life I was supposed to have forgotten. The transformation had been gradual, so subtle that I hadn't noticed it happening until it was complete. First, it was just a suggestion that my old floral couch might look better in storage. Then my photographs were too cluttered for the living room walls. My kitchen gadgets were outdated and replaced with sleek, modern appliances I didn't know how to use. Slowly, methodically, I was being erased from the home I had built with my own hands. I heard the front door slam with such force that it rattled the windows, followed by the sharp, angry clicks of Jessica's heels on the tile floor. She wore those heels everywhere now, even in the house, as if she were constantly preparing for some important meeting. I wiped the sweat from my brow with the back of my glove and stayed put, my knees aching against the hard-packed earth. In this house, you learn to make yourself small, to disappear into the background until the storm passed. I cannot believe this. Her voice, sharp as broken glass, cut through the quiet afternoon like a knife through silk. Mark, her husband, murmured something soft and placating, the sound of a man who had long ago chosen peace over principle. He'd been making that choice for 3 years now, ever since they'd moved in with me. I stayed still, pretending to be absorbed by a stubborn weed that had somehow found a foothold between my carefully planted rows. Maybe they wouldn't see me. Maybe this time, whatever crisis had erupted in their perfectly planned lives wouldn't somehow become my fault. This was our one chance, Mark, our one chance to get out of this place and into a real home in Scottsdale, and she ruined it. The words hit me like a physical blow. Scottsdale, where the rich people lived in their glass houses and infinity pools, where Jessica had always dreamed of belonging. My hands froze on the gardening tool. She was talking about me. After 43 years of being her mother, of sacrificing and supporting and loving her through every disappointment and triumph, I had somehow become a she whose very existence was an obstacle to her happiness. I heard the sliding glass door to the patio grind open, its track filled with the sand that constantly blew in from the desert, no matter how often I cleaned it. "There you are." Jessica spat, her voice dripping with the kind of contempt usually reserved for strangers who had personally wronged you. Her shadow fell over me, blocking out the sun that had been warming my back. I looked up slowly, my neck creaking with the movement. Her face, usually composed into a mask of bored superiority, was twisted with rage. Her blonde hair, professionally styled that morning at a salon that charged more than I used to spend on groceries in a month, seemed to vibrate with her fury. She looked like a stranger wearing my daughter's features. What did you do? She demanded, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. I took off my gloves slowly, buying myself time to think. My hands, revealed in the harsh sunlight, looked ancient and spotted, the hands of a woman who had spent decades working with them. I don't know what you're talking about, sweetheart. Don't you sweetheart me, she hissed, taking a step closer. The realtor just called. The buyers are pulling out. They said their agent got spooked. Said something about unstable water access and an old well liability. Sound familiar? My blood ran cold, and for a moment, the desert heat seemed to leach from my bones. The week before, the realtor, a young woman named Brittany, with perfectly straight teeth and an enthusiasm that felt rehearsed, had been showing the house to potential buyers. A nice young couple from Phoenix, both of them wearing expensive watches and looking at everything with the calculating eyes of people who had never wanted for anything. They had been asking about the yard, about the landscaping, about the unique desert character of the property. And I, thinking I was being helpful, thinking I was adding value to their tour, had pointed to the old stone cap of the well near the back of the property. It was a piece of history, a reminder of the days when this land was just raw desert and hope. That's the old well, I'd said with what I thought was a charming smile. My husband always said the water from it was the sweetest in the county. When we first moved here, before the city water lines reached this far out, that well kept us alive through 3 drought years. I had thought it was a selling point, a piece of the home story that would make them fall in love with the place the way David and I had. I thought it showed character, resilience, the kind of pioneer spirit that built Arizona. I just mentioned the old well, I said now, my voice barely a whisper. I thought it was a good thing. Jessica laughed, a high, cruel sound that had no humor in it, like glass breaking in an empty room. A good thing? A good thing? You went out of your way to sabotage us. You knew we needed this sale. You knew this was our dream. She gestured wildly at the house, at the yard, at the endless blue sky above us. You are so selfish. You've never wanted me to have anything better than you had. The accusation hit me like a slap. Selfish. After a lifetime of putting her first, of sacrificing my own wants and needs for hers, of staying silent when she made decisions that hurt me, I was selfish. That's not true, Jessica, I said, my voice trembling now with an emotion I couldn't quite name. This house, everything I've done. This house is a prison, she screamed, her voice cracking with a lifetime of perceived injustices. And you've ruined my life, my entire life. You've been this. This weight, always there, always judging, always reminding me of everything I'm not. The words hung in the superheated air between us like a curse, a weight. That's what I was to her, not a mother who had loved her unconditionally, not a woman who had built a life and a home from nothing. A weight. Mark appeared in the doorway behind her, his polo shirt already showing sweat stains despite the air conditioning. Jess, come on, he said weakly, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. They never did. In 3 years of living in this house, of eating meals I prepared and sleeping in beds I made, he had never once looked me directly in the eye. But Jessica wasn't finished. She took a step closer, her face inches from mine, and I could smell her expensive perfume mixed with rage and desperation. I want you out, she said, her voice dropping to a low, venomous whisper. I want you out of my house, now. I stared into my daughter's eyes, the same blue eyes I had looked into the day she was born 43 years ago in Good Samaritan Hospital, and I saw nothing of the girl I had raised. I saw a stranger, a bitter, angry stranger, who looked at me with pure contempt. This was the child I had nursed through pneumonia when she was 7. The teenager I had stayed up with during her heartbreak over Tommy Martinez. The young woman I had helped through college, sending her money I could barely afford so she could focus on her studies instead of working. This was my daughter, and she saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to her happiness. I didn't argue, I didn't cry. The Arizona heat had baked the tears out of me years ago, and the shock of her words had left me hollow and strangely calm. I stood up slowly, my knees cracking in protest, joints that had been complaining more and more lately about the long hours I spent tending to this garden, this home. This life that apparently meant nothing to the people I had built it for. I brushed the dirt from my jeans, the same jeans I'd been wearing for 5 years, because new clothes seemed like an unnecessary expense when there was always something more important to spend money on. I walked past her, past Mark's downcast eyes and slumped shoulders, and into the cool, silent house. My footsteps echoed on the tile floor that I had mopped just that morning, the same floor I mopped every morning because Jessica liked it to be spotless. I went to my room, not the master bedroom anymore. Not since Jessica and Mark had decided that the bigger room was more appropriate for a married couple, and pulled my old suitcase from the top of the closet. It was the same suitcase David and I had used for our honeymoon to the Grand Canyon 45 years ago, battered and scarred, but still functional. I began to pack methodically, automatically. My worn clothes, the comfortable cotton dresses and sensible shoes that Jessica always criticized as frumpy. My mother's quilt, the one thing I refused to let her relocate to storage. The silver-framed photo of David and me on our wedding day, both of us young and hopeful and convinced that love could conquer anything. I left the porcelain birds. They didn't belong here anymore. Nothing of mine did. As I zipped the suitcase, I thought about what she'd said, my house. She had called it her house, as if the deed in her name had somehow erased the 27 years David and I had lived here, the sweat and dreams and love we had poured into every square foot. She had forgotten, or perhaps she had never known. The house may have been in her name now, a transfer we'd made for tax purposes when David got sick, a way to protect our assets from the crushing weight of medical bills, but the land it sat on, the very ground she stood on when she screamed at me, had a secret David had made sure would belong only to me. And now, for the first time in a very long time, I was going to use it. The land was just a dusty patch of Sonoran desert when David and I first bought it in 1981. We were young then, full of hope and naive optimism, and had saved for 7 years to afford the down payment. It was 5 acres of nothing but dirt and dreams, studded with saguaro cacti that stood like ancient sentinels and creosote bushes that released their distinctive smell after rare desert rains. The real estate agent, a man named Bob Henley, who wore polyester suits and a skeptical expression, thought we were crazy. "There's no city water out here," he'd warned us, shaking his head as we signed the papers in his stuffy office. "You'll be on your own for everything. Electric, septic, water, it's all going to be your responsibility. Most folks aren't cut out for that kind of independence." That's exactly what we wanted, to be on our own, together, building something from nothing. What Bob didn't know, and what we only discovered after hiring a hydrologist recommended by David's colleague at the university, was that our patch of desert sat atop a small but significant natural aquifer. It was our own private water source, a hidden vein of life running beneath the parched earth. David was a man who thought in generations, not years. He was a geologist by trade, and he understood the soul of the land in ways that most people never could. He could read the story written in rock layers and mineral deposits, could see the ancient history of water and time carved into the landscape. "This water, Carol," he'd told me one evening, his hand sweeping across the horizon as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple that seemed to set the mountains on fire. "This is the real gold in Arizona. One day, it'll be worth more than any house we could ever build on top of it." I had laughed then, thinking he was being dramatic. Water was just water. It came from taps and hoses, and as long as you paid your bill, it was always there. I didn't understand then what he was trying to tell me about scarcity and value and the things that truly matter. When we drew up the legal paperwork for the property, David was insistent about creating 2 separate deeds. It was complicated and expensive, requiring the services of a specialized water rights attorney, but he wouldn't be swayed. One deed was for the property itself, the land and the house we would eventually build. The other, a much more complex and arcane document filled with legal language that made my head spin, was for what the lawyer called ancestral water rights tied to the original territorial land grant. It was a separate legal entity, a piece of paper that gave its owner absolute control over the aquifer beneath the soil. "This one," he said, handing me the water deed with the solemnity of someone passing down a family heirloom. Stays in your name. Only your name. Why, David? I'd asked, confused by the complexity of it all. We're in this together. We're partners. He smiled, that slow, kind smile that always made me feel safe and loved and protected from whatever storms might come. I know we are, sweetheart, but families change. Children grow up and have their own ideas about what's important. The world gets complicated, and people forget where they came from. This is your security. If anything ever happens to me, if anything ever goes wrong, this is the one thing no one can ever take from you. It's your voice when you feel like you don't have one. I put the deed in a safe deposit box at First National Bank of Mesa, and for the most part, forgot about it. We had a life to build, a house to construct, a daughter to raise. The water rights seemed like an abstract concept, a legal curiosity that would probably never matter. We built our house with our own hands and the help of a few friends, working weekends and evenings until we had something that was truly ours. We planted the garden, established the desert landscaping, and created a home that felt like a sanctuary from the outside world. When Jessica was born, she was the center of our universe. We photographed her first steps on the tile floor we had laid ourselves. We taught her to identify the different types of cacti in our yard. We showed her how to be gentle with the desert tortoises that occasionally wandered through our property. For 25 years, we were happy. Not perfect, not without problems, but genuinely content with the life we had built together. Then David got sick. The diagnosis came in late summer of 2015. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, inoperable. The doctors gave him 6 months. He fought for 18 months, longer than anyone expected, but the fight was expensive in ways that went far beyond money. The medical bills were staggering, even with insurance. Experimental treatments, specialist consultations, medications that cost more per month than we used to spend in a year, it all added up to a mountain of debt that threatened to bury us alive. Our lawyer, Arthur Vance, advised us to transfer the property deed into Jessica's name. It was a smart, simple way to shield our main asset from potential liens and creditors. It's just paperwork. He assured us, it doesn't change anything about who really owns the house, it's just protection. Jessica was thrilled when we told her about the transfer. In her mind, the house became hers that day, and she began talking about when I inherit, with a casualness that made me uncomfortable. But David was dying, and there were more important things to worry about than property deeds and inheritance planning. We never mentioned the other deed, the water rights document. There was no reason to. I never imagined a day when I would need that voice David had given me. After David passed away in January of 2017, I stayed in the house because it was where his ghost lived, in the scent of his aftershave that lingered in the closet, in the worn spot on the kitchen floor where he used to stand and watch the quail in the early morning, in the garden we had planted together. When Jessica and Mark moved in a year later, ostensibly to help take care of me, I was grateful. I thought it would be a new chapter, a house full of life and laughter again. I imagined grandchildren running through the rooms, family dinners around the table David had built, holidays that felt like celebrations instead of endurance tests. But slowly, subtly, I was erased. My routine became an inconvenience. My cooking was too old-fashioned for their sophisticated palates. My stories about the old days were depressing and unwelcome. My opinions about household decisions were irrelevant. I became a tenant in the home I had built, a silent, gray-haired ghost who was expected to clean the floors and do the laundry and then disappear when company came over. The final insult was when they decided to sell the house and move to Scottsdale. They presented it as a done deal, something they had planned without consulting me. "You'll love the retirement community we found for you," Jessica had said with false brightness. "It's very nice, and you'll have people your own age to talk to." A retirement community, a place where old people went to wait for death, surrounded by strangers and institutional food and the smell of disinfectant. Now, sitting in a sterile motel room off the Interstate 10, listening to the hum of the air conditioner that was a poor substitute for the song of the desert cicadas, I clutched my purse. Inside, it was a single, old-fashioned key, the key to that safe deposit box where David's gift waited for me. Jessica thought I had ruined her dream. She had no idea she had just awakened mine. The next morning, I drove my 20-year-old sedan through the Phoenix traffic to the First National Bank of Mesa. The car was another thing Jessica criticized: too old, too unreliable, an embarrassment. She had been pressuring me to get rid of it and rely on rides from her or public transportation, another way to make me dependent on her charity. The air was already thick with heat, even though it was barely 9 o'clock in the morning. I walked past a young couple arguing about money and an elderly man counting out pennies for a cashier's check. The world was full of its own small heartbreaks, its own quiet desperation. The woman at the safe deposit desk, Linda Martinez, had known me for years. She was probably 60 herself now, with kind eyes and graying hair that she wore in a neat bun. "Carol," she said, her smile genuinely warm. "Good to see you, hon. Just the usual today?" "Just the usual, Linda," I said, signing the register with hands that were steadier than they had been in months. She led me through the familiar ritual, past the heavy vault door and into the small, private viewing room where customers could examine their valuables in security and silence. I placed the metal box on the table and opened it with the small key I had carried in my purse for so many years. There it was, sitting atop David's old military medals from his service in Vietnam and my mother's pearl necklace that had been her grandmother's before her. A thick, vellum envelope, yellowed with age and sealed with the red wax stamp of the law office that had prepared it all those years ago. Deed of Water Rights, Parcel 7B, Maricopa County. My hands were steady as I broke the seal and took out the document. The legal language was as dense and archaic as I remembered, full of phrases like "in perpetuity" and "heirs and assigns," and "whereas the party of the first part," but the essential meaning was clear. I owned the water beneath the land. Not just access to it, but ownership of it, complete, absolute, untethered from the surface property title. David had been so wise, so prescient. He had seen a future I couldn't imagine, a time when water would be more valuable than gold, when development would turn the desert into a patchwork of golf courses and swimming pools, when every drop would be fought over by lawyers and corporations. I didn't take the deed with me when I left the bank. I just needed to see it, to hold it, to remember the power it represented. I returned the box to Linda and walked out into the blazing morning sunshine, my steps lighter than they had been in a decade. My next call was to a name I hadn't spoken in years: Arthur Vance. He had been David's lawyer, a cantankerous old man in his 70s who specialized in the labyrinthine world of Arizona land and water law. I found his number in my old address book, the pages yellowed and the ink faded but still legible. I expected a secretary to answer, but Arthur picked up himself, his voice a gravelly rumble that brought back memories of sitting in his cluttered office while David and I planned our future. "Vance." "Arthur, it's Carol Collins, David's wife." There was a pause, and I could almost hear him sitting up straighter in his chair. "Carol, my God, it's been a long time. I was sorry to hear about David when it happened. He was a good man, one of the best I ever knew." "He was," I said softly, feeling the familiar pang of loss that still caught me off guard sometimes. "Arthur, I need your help. It's about the water rights, Parcel 7B. I could almost hear him smile. "Ah, yes, the ace in the hole. I always wondered if you'd ever have to play that card. David said you might, someday. What's happened?" I told him everything, the years of quiet disrespect, the gradual erosion of my place in my own home, the sale of the house without my consultation, Jessica's cruel words in the garden. I didn't cry or dramatize. I stated the facts as clearly and calmly as I could, the way David had taught me to approach problems with logic and precision. When I was done, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Arthur let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "She called you a weight. The irony is so thick you could cut it with a knife." "What do I do, Arthur?" "What do you want to do, Carol? Because those rights, you know what's happening out there in Scottsdale and Paradise Valley and all those fancy developments. Water is the new oil. Your little aquifer isn't just valuable anymore, it's essential. There are golf courses and luxury communities that would pay millions for guaranteed water access. I thought of Jessica's dream home in Scottsdale, the life she felt she was owed, the future she thought I was too selfish to help her achieve. I want to sell them, I said, my voice clear and firm for the first time in years. To the highest bidder, Arthur added, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in his voice. It won't be quiet, Carol. When you sell water rights independently of the land they're attached to, you're not just selling water, you're turning off the tap forever. The well on that property will be legally capped and sealed. The land will be rezoned as non-irrigable. The property value will. Will what, Arthur? Will be cut in half, maybe more. Nobody wants to buy desert property with no water access. It's essentially worthless for development or resale. I closed my eyes and saw Jessica's face in the garden, twisted with rage and contempt as she called me a weight on her life. I understand, I said. Good, he replied. Leave it with me. And Carol? David would be proud. The first sign that the world was shifting came not as a roar, but as a whisper. A text message from Jessica, 2 weeks after my meeting with Arthur. Mom, where are you? The realtor called again. Some legal thing came up about the property survey. It's probably nothing, but can you call me? I read the message 3 times, sitting in my small efficiency apartment across town, where I had been staying since leaving the house. The tone was different, not commanding or irritated, but almost concerned, as if she had suddenly remembered that I was a person who might have feelings or rights or opinions that mattered. I deleted the message without replying. Arthur worked with the quiet efficiency of a desert predator. Within a week, he had initiated what he called a blind auction for the water rights, contacting the legal teams of 3 major development corporations that were actively building in the area. The response was immediate and fierce. Water rights in Maricopa County were like lottery tickets, rare, valuable, and desperately sought after by companies building golf courses and luxury communities in the desert. The bidding war lasted exactly 4 days. Desert Sun Estates, the company building the massive golf community just 3 miles from our property, emerged as the winner with an offer that made me sit down hard in my small kitchen chair. $750,000. For water rights to a well that Jessica didn't even know existed. I signed the papers in Arthur's dusty office on a Tuesday morning, my signature firmer and more confident than it had been in years. It was the signature of a woman who knew her own worth. They'll send a team to inspect and cap the well within 30 days, Arthur explained as I initialed each page. It's all very professional and legal. The new owners want to ensure their investment is protected. And the property? Arthur's smile was not entirely pleasant. Will be reclassified as desert land with no water access. Essentially unbuildable and unsellable, except to someone who wants 5 acres of dirt and cacti for sentimental reasons. The day the sale closed, 2 things happened simultaneously. A certified letter from Desert Sun Estates' legal department was delivered to what Jessica still thought of as her house. It was a formal notification that they were the new owners of the water rights for Parcel 7B, and that they would be sending a team within 30 days to professionally inspect and permanently cap the on-site well in accordance with state regulations. At the same time, a check with 6 zeros was deposited into a new bank account that Arthur had opened for me at a different bank across town. My phone started ringing that afternoon. Jessica. I let it go to voicemail. Mom, I got this insane letter. It has to be a mistake. It says someone sold our water. That's not even a thing, right? Water belongs to whoever owns the land. Call me back, this is just some kind of clerical error. The phone rang again an hour later. Mark this time, I ignored it. The phone rang again. Jessica. Okay, I called Arthur Vance because his name was on some old paperwork I found. He said he represents you in some water thing? What is going on? What did you do? Mom, the buyers for the house are freaking out. Their lender won't approve the mortgage without guaranteed water access. You are costing us this sale. Call me, now. I sat in my small living room, in a comfortable chair I had bought with my own money, and brewed myself a cup of mint tea, the the way David used to like it with honey and a splash of lemon. The phone buzzed and vibrated on the counter like an angry insect, but I had turned the ringer off. I watched the desert sunset through my window and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. The next day, the true panic set in. Jessica must have spoken to her own lawyer, someone who could explain the grim reality of what had happened. The water rights were gone, sold legally and irrevocably. The well was going to be capped. The house was now a structure sitting on a piece of arid land with no independent water source, a liability in the middle of the desert. Voicemail 3, her voice choked with tears. "Mom, please, just talk to me. We made a mistake." I was angry. I was stressed about the move. I didn't mean what I said. "You can't do this. This is our home, our future. You've destroyed everything we worked for." Our home, our future. The words echoed in my quiet apartment. She still didn't get it. She thought I had taken something from her. She didn't understand that I had simply taken back what was mine. I didn't call back. My silence was the only answer she would understand. For years, my silence had been her permission to treat me however she wanted. Now, it was her consequence. The messages continued for a week, first angry, then pleading, then desperate. Mark left messages too, his voice shaky and uncertain as he begged me to work something out and think about family. Family. The word had lost its meaning somewhere along the way. They found me 10 days later. I wasn't hiding. I had simply moved to a place where I could breathe freely for the first time in years. It was a small 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet senior community in Prescott, where the air was cooler and the pine trees smelled like rain and possibility. The knock on my door was hesitant, almost fearful. I looked through the peephole and saw them standing there, looking smaller and more frayed than I had ever seen them. Jessica's perfect hair was a mess, her makeup smeared from crying. Mark's shoulders were slumped in defeat, and he kept glancing around as if he expected someone to rescue him from this conversation. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. "Mom," Jessica whispered, her eyes red and swollen. She tried to step forward, to hug me, but I remained still, and she stopped. "We're sorry," she said, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "We are so sorry. I was horrible. I was a monster. I don't know why I said those things. I was just stressed about money and the move, and everything felt like it was falling apart." Mark nodded numbly beside her. "We'll do anything, Carol. Just talk to the company. See if you can buy the rights back. We'll pay for it. We'll take out a loan. We'll sell our cars, whatever it takes." I looked at them, these two people who had made me feel like a piece of old furniture in my own home, who had erased me from my own story, and I felt a strange, hollow sadness. Not for them, but for the years I had lost trying to earn their love and respect. "There's nothing to buy back," I said quietly. "It's done." "But why?" Jessica cried, her composure finally breaking completely. "Why would you do this to us, to your own family?" I met her gaze for the first time in longer than I could remember, and I didn't look away. "Because you told me I had ruined your life," I said softly. "So I decided to finally start living my own. You stood in the garden I built with my own hands and called me a weight. You didn't see a mother who had sacrificed for you. You saw a burden, an obstacle to your happiness." I stepped back into my apartment and picked up a piece of paper from the small table by the door. It was a copy of the original water deed, the one David had insisted on putting in my name alone all those years ago. "My name is on this," I said, holding it out so she could see it. "Just like my sweat is in the soil of that garden, and my savings paid for the foundation of that house, and my love filled every room you wanted to redecorate." She stared at the document, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. She was finally seeing it, not just the legal paperwork, but the truth it represented. She had built her life on a foundation she had never bothered to inspect, taking for granted the bedrock of sacrifice and love that had made everything possible. "You erased me from the story, Jessica," I continued, my voice steady and calm. "You made me invisible in my own home, unwelcome at my own table. I decided it was time to write the final chapter myself. I didn't keep the money to punish you," I added, though part of me knew that wasn't entirely true. I kept it to be free from having to ask for respect in my own home. Free from being treated like a guest in a life I built. Free from watching you sell the only thing I had left of your father without even asking how I felt about it. I looked past them, out into the clear mountain air where birds were singing in the pine trees. I forgive you, Jessica. I forgive you because carrying anger is too heavy a burden for someone my age. But I will not fix this for you. Some things, once broken, can't be put back together. And some things, like a mother's worth, shouldn't have to be proven over and over again. Please, she whispered, tears streaming down her face, please don't do this. I turned and quietly closed the door, leaving them in the silence of the hall. I didn't watch them leave. Instead, I walked to my small balcony overlooking the pine forest and took a deep breath of the cool, clean air. This was the air of freedom. The pain of her words had become a scar. It no longer bled, but served as a reminder of what I had survived. I didn't know if Jessica would ever knock on my door again, but I knew this. If she did, it would have to be as a daughter who finally understood her mistake, not as an entitled girl demanding I fix her life. Until then, I would live here, in peace, rebuilding a life on my own term zone, where my voice was the only one that truly mattered.